Good afternoon and welcome to Conversations on Showing Up for Kids. My name is Tim Markle. I'm director of the Southern Regional Center. We are out of the Weisman Center as part of the University Center for Excellence on Developmental Disabilities. Conversations is a hopefully casual type place where we can share our stories and come together and talk about things that matter to us as family members of kids with disabilities and the champions that support them. Today, I am honored to have Felicia and Danielle here. Our topic is not an easy one, so please be aware of that, as this may be a tough topic for you, and that you have every right to take care of yourself in whatever way you would need to take care of yourself. I am always honored when people share their stories with me, and it just, especially when it involves pain and grief. I'm just honored to be in that presence. So Felicia, Danielle, I am a rotten host today. And so I welcome you to come on. I'm going to pin both of you, I think, and go ahead and take it away. Do you guys have any, I think you have sharing capabilities. If you had any pictures or anything you want to share, you didn't need to. But if you wanted to, that opportunity is there. So I don't know who would like to go first, but we're talking today about grief and the loss of a child. And that's about all I can say about it, because I already know I'm already crying. Okay, I'm stopping.
I can start. Hello, everyone. My name is Felica Turner-Walton. I am the CEO and founder of Healing Our Hearts Foundation, which is located here in Madison. I am also from a professional level, and I have the accomplishment, of being a certified grief educator, a certified grief support specialist, and most newly, as recent as today, a certified peer specialist, as well as a certified parent peer specialist. So accomplishments just in that area. I also am a bereavement doula, as well as a end-of-life doula. More personally, I am also the mother of a 25-year-old son who was diagnosed at age 5 with epilepsy, as well as the mother of Zaire, my 4-month-old, who passed away 6 years ago, April 7th, 2016, after complications after receiving his 4-month wellness check. So that's a little about me and my experience along the lines of grief and loss, as well as along the lines of a mental disability.
And my name is Danielle Gerber. I'm here today because I'm a mom of 3. One is in heaven, and he was my firstborn. His name is Jack. He was diagnosed with a severe seizure disorder when he was 6 weeks old, and that was due to a genetic mutation, spontaneous, not from my husband and I, and was very shocking to find that out. He was with us until just before his 5th birthday and passed away January 22nd of 2020, right before COVID. So these last couple of years have been a very strange mix of grieving the loss of our child, but then also living in this strange pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic world, and just trying to find the right way to continue on with life after doing what I thought I was going to be doing for the rest of my life, caring for him and devoting my everything to being his caregiver. So I kind of took that path in a new direction when I joined LEND, which the Wisconsin Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities, also at the Weisman Center, and that's how I met Tim. So I kind of poured myself into that as a way to keep talking about Jack and share experiences from caring for him and navigating the system and the whole mess that is, because I felt like that was a way for me to kind of continue his legacy. I wish that I had known about somebody like Felicia earlier, because there was just a total lack of support that I found, because I went to therapy, but traditional therapy just didn't do it for me. I felt like the therapist had no idea what I needed as far as grieving the loss of my child, but my very complicated special needs child who was, he needed assistance 24/7 from me. And that was my entire identity. And all of the friends and people that I talked to on a daily basis, once he passed away, that whole circle was just gone. So I didn't feel like traditional therapy cut it. And it was hard to find other parents who were in similar situations, who had been raising a child with special needs. And yeah, I'll let Felicia jump back in too, so we can kind of have a conversation.
Oh man, Danielle, like I'm just sitting here and I just want to add another piece and layer of thought process to this grief and loss space, right? I mentioned everything about my children and things like that. So I'm a mom of five, actually a mom of six. I had an 8-week miscarriage very early on. And then I'm also married. So I wanted to add those two things, but also to provide that other piece of grief and loss that oftentimes is left out of all of these spaces. Not only do I have to deal with my son who has epilepsy, I also have anxiety, PTSD, as well as major depression. So let me start by going there. So echoing everything. Oh my God, Danielle, it's like what you just said is like, yeah, all of that. Now, the other piece of that is really when you're in a place and you're dealing with grief and loss and just the experience, right? We always have to think about no one knows what to do in this space. Like people are expecting you to act or to operate in a certain manner. And it's like, well, this is also my first experience, in this space. And, the one thing especially, and I'll speak a lot about the experience around the work centered, especially Black and Brown bodies for healing our hearts that we do, because one of the things, as Danielle mentioned, that the support it was very minimal. And from a perspective of, we know there's generally 3 places or 4 places, honestly, where everyone says go to. One being your faith-based locations, one being a support group, one being back to the hospital, where you may have experienced the birth of your child. And then the other, as Danielle just mentioned, going to see a counselor. Did that one, went to see a counselor as well. And that very same experience you had, Danielle. And one of the things that happened for me, right, and I'll go here, health disparities really took the top space, and just racism even going, because here I was, this Black person who had to go in and talk to a counselor who didn't understand from that perspective. And then also leading to that, it was like the disrespect really began to come in, because here I am, and I worked a good job, so I had insurance, and where my appointments are supposed to be an hour long, and they're getting shortened because she's just doing whatever else is important. So here I am supposedly having an hour of conversation, and it got down to, okay, 55 minutes and 50 minutes. So it eventually got down to about 40 minutes. So 20 whole minutes of me missing. And it was like, the experience was her at the end of almost every one of those sessions is her saying, oh my God, Felicia, you're just doing amazing. And it's like, but I'm not, like, and so the one thing I'm sure Danielle could probably relate to is when you've experienced something as tender as losing a child, oftentimes we think about, and a lot of people in society in general, becomes a point or a time where it's almost like, well, is your grief more than mine? And it's not intentional, but when people say, Losing my mother was the last thing I could have thought about. This is really hurting me. And the way that I look at those things is, I agree, I don't know what it's like to lose a mother, so I can't speak from that perspective. Mine comes from child loss. And when I do talk about all of losses, because not only do we work with infant and maternal loss, but being, as Danielle mentioned, COVID-19 really, really, really caused a lot more trauma and a lot more grief, not because there was, you couldn't have a normal memorial service in a funeral home or in a church. So there were graveside burials and things like that. People missed out on the opportunity to have after service sessions or repast. So there was like this really, really odd space of, okay, we've kept busy by planning the funeral and planning the repast. Now what? And then everybody else in the world just thinks that you're supposed to go back to normal. And it's like, for me, March 2nd, March 3rd, I had 5 living children. March 6th, I was talking to the doctor about taking my son off of life support. So realistically, being in that space, it's like, okay, where do I pick up the pieces from here and how do I go on? And it's a hard space to be in, because not only are you thinking about your children or your spouse, but everyone else who had that connection with baby, right? Or with your child. But everybody else who had their own special memory. And it's like, okay, I'm mom, and my grief is more than my mom, who only saw him a number of times because he lived with me. You're not thinking about those things. It's the both and. You're thinking about your grief as well as everybody else. And now you begin to want to know the memories and the things that your child did when he or she was with you, so you can have something to hold on to. And Danielle mentioning all she wanted to do, she joined Lind because she wanted to just talk about Jack. Those things and those memories are so important and so intimate and so necessary for the vitality of life, not just for mom, because mom carries the family, but dad is also carrying the family as well as his grief in a completely different way. And that shows up by, honey, what do you need? What can I get for you? Are you okay? Do I need to wipe your tears? And then, any siblings or any children that for me, Kayla was 4 when Zaire passed. So she was the youngest in the house. And then there was Kaven, who was 12, and Marcuria, who was 16. So being in that space for them, not only did I have this 4-year-old who I know didn't understand what death was, but then I had these other children who did, and having to find a common denominator to explain to them individually, because they aren't the same people, right? They don't have the same personality, the same anything other than mom and dad. They're their own person. I got to explain to them. So explaining to Kayla that Zaire is flying with the birds, and by the time she was 6, her saying to me, Mom, I have a question for you. And it's like, what's your question? And she's like, now you told me Zaire was flying with the birds, but the birds come back. Why can't he? And it's like, okay, now it's time for a different conversation. So where people think that grief ends or it stops, no, because for each year you're remembering. For me, this year, Zaire would be graduating kindergarten, going to first grade. So that's something that, of course, I have to honor, extend my own self-grace and compassion, because I know that's going to evoke emotions from me, because I'm seeing all of his friends and my friends' children who I was pregnant with at the same time, they're doing this thing. And our children don't get to do those things. So I'll pause there and give it back to Danielle.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you said, there's so much that you can relate to within each other's stories, even though, we have different lives, we're in different areas, we have different things that we look to for support. But I mean, I'm still waiting to have a celebration of life for Jack because of COVID. I mean, have not yet been able to get to a place where we can throw him the party that we feel like he deserved. And I want to be able to see all the people that made a huge difference in my life, in his life, and my family's life. I want everyone to be able to get together and hug. I don't want to be wearing masks and, keep our distance. So things like that. And then my other two kids were 10 months old and 3 when Jack passed away. So we've had lots of different conversations now about what happened to Jack. Why did that happen? Where is he now? When is that going to happen to me? And as hard as it is, it's refreshing in a way to be able to talk to them, because they see things just so clearly, matter of fact, and they'll accept anything I tell them. But I like being asked questions about it, and I love that they want to know. And I we talk about him every day, and we look at pictures, and I want to make sure that they remember him in whatever capacity they're able to. But that was, I think, one of the best pieces for me after he passed away. My 3-year-old, he's just very innocent, young. They have no idea what death means. And he had never experienced anyone dying before. So he cried just when I said, Jack's not coming home. But then after that, it was just trying to talk about Jack, like, Jack, like this, Mom, can we do this? Just little things that would help bring me back to the present and see that we could honor his memory in little ways every day, just going about our lives. And when he's swinging on our swing set and he thinks if he can swing high enough, he can maybe say hi to Jack in heaven. I think that's just great. And it makes me happy to think about that. But I wanted to touch on the piece that Felicia mentioned about support for everyone else, because like you said perfectly, Mom kind of carries the house, but then, at least in my family, my husband was the one working more than a full-time job to support us so that I could be home with the kids. And he was worried about me not having an outlet for my grief, but he had no outlet. And I know that people reached out to me asking how I was doing, how I was feeling, but people were not doing that with him. And that made me really sad. And I didn't know how to best support him, because sometimes you need someone else to talk to other than your spouse. But then I also worried about my mom, who was a very big part of our lives and helping care for Jack. And she took it really, really hard, obviously losing a grandchild. And she didn't feel like she could go get therapy for her grief, because she's like, I'm just the grandma. So what does that say about our society, that we just don't let people feel their feelings?
Yeah, man, all of that. And it was, you just bringing up that, it really made me sit here and think about how, I had my kids, the room was full, the day that we advised family that Zaire, we were choosing to donate. So he's an organ donor. So in some way, he's still here. And I honor that. And it just, if I start crying, I promise you I'm not sad. It's just because I love speaking about Zai. But it just makes me really think about the day that we were all in the hospital, and we had to deliver the news that we would be removing him from life support. And Kayla was sitting next to me, and she said, "You're sad about Zai, Mom?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "He told me to tell you he's okay." And I'm just like, I felt a sense of relief, you know? And because, like you're saying, Danielle, your 3-year-old, you know, just the innocence and the pureness and you know that they're innocent, they're pure. So just like Zai, Jack is with the angels. So just really thinking about that whole connotation is like, I know my 4-year-old, just like your 3-year-old, is also in that innocent and pure stage. So that thing about when people would say, "Oh, the angels are playing with them," when they would smile in their sleep, like that really gave me the essence of thinking about Kayla still had that angelic sense. And Zai is, he did tell her to tell us that he's okay. And then at 6 months, it was just amazing, the feeling. I was in my room, and I'm knowing Zai is fully 6 months at this point. And by having 4 living children, I know at 6 months he'd be crawling just like the rest of them were, right? And I'm sitting in my room, and we had 2 bathrooms, one, of course, in my room, and then the children's bathroom. And my Caven was in the shower, and I told my oldest daughter, I said, just bring Kayla in here and put her in my shower. That's fine. I'm okay with that. And mind you, while I'm sitting there, I'm of course emotional. I'm like near tears because I'm just thinking about the goodness of Zai being 6 months and he's gone. And
Sure.
Kayla burst in the room.
Felicia,
And
Felicia, for 1 second, we had cut out, or at least I cut out that unstable internet popped up. And so the last thing that I remember you talking about is that Caven was in the shower.
Okay, so Caven was in the shower, and I told my daughter to bring Kayla and just bring her into my room, and we would bath her in my room. And from there, when she came in, I'm in an emotional state, nearly to tears, holding off. And she comes in, she says, "Mom, are you crying?" I was like, "No, not yet." And she says, "Mom, Zaya's right there." And I said, "Where?" She says, "He's sitting by the basket." And I'm telling my daughter, I said, we call my oldest daughter Chico. I said, "Chico, do you hear her?" And she says, "Yeah." And I said, "Kayla, what's he doing now?" She's like, "He's crawling down the hall." And I'm just like, "Okay, little girl, the angels are clearly with you. Thank you." And that was like, oh my God, and from there, I immediately perked up, and just even sitting here now and revisiting that moment is really giving me the oxytocin is running through my body, thinking about, my daughter had this connection. And like Danielle said, she's, even my kids, we still have Zaire's pictures up in the house, everything, because we don't make it like death is not something that's not okay to talk about. You talk about it in here. We talk about it. It's important because, children, and let's be honest, kids go to school, and we know they hear mean things, to the point that, things have been said to Kayla about her dead brother, and her, saying, it's an honor, it's a gift and a curse to have a deceased brother, because I get to be something that a lot of people don't. And that's to have an angel brother. So I'm an angel sister. And she's not afraid, to talk to people about her feelings and emotions, and to even help older people. But and it's like she still has this sweet innocence about herself. My cousin passed away December 9th. And it's my dad's side of the family. And like we all know with Black families, just from a generational space, that sometimes when mom and dad divorce, break up, that families are, most times if the child is with mom, then they really don't have relationships with the dad's side of the family. So that was my space. But for my daughter, she really, when my cousin passed away, she didn't say, "Oh my God, my cousin died," or "she passed away." What she said was, "I'm sad because I didn't get the chance to know her." So thinking about, that space from a 10-year-old, our children are even touched, right, Danielle, by these things that affect them. And they have us, it's just like they have this aura of beauty, and innocence that radiates, and purity that remains with them. It actually helps us, in a sense, to look at grief and loss and death in a different sense.
Tim, should I pause so you can comment?
Oh, I have so many questions. No, not really comments, but I got questions. Um, could you tell us a little bit about as you were, because everybody grieves differently, and so they need different supports, and we know that, but could you share some of the things that maybe, especially when I think of medical professions, as you were both involved with the medical system as your children passed, what were some things that were done well to help in your grief? And what were some things that maybe those professionals who should have known better could have done better?
I think the first thing I would say is acknowledging the grief with mom and dad. It's completely okay to acknowledge the loss. And I'm sorry goes a long, long way. Um, having, there are no words because no one can provide you your child back. If that was the one thing that could happen, then yes, that medical professional would do it. But it is a moment of silence and just holding space and being honest, saying, because as you just mentioned, Tim, everyone processes grief differently. So one of the things that I do is I say, I don't know what you need. However, if there's something that you think I can do for you. And early on for me, I most times catch people in the planning stage of the funeral services. So one of the things that we do is, we go in because we have an awesome word of mouth process that tends to work better than saying go here and fill out a form or do this or do that. People always end up calling me to say, hey, do you know such and such, they experienced this and I know them and this is what they're going through. And I'm like, nope, doesn't matter. Let's go in and let's have this conversation. So I go in oftentimes, it's around providing, a stipend towards funeral arrangements or services and things like that. So we'll go in, we'll provide a check, we'll provide a mommy and me basket where we have a journal, an ink pen, different things just in that basket. And we have a conversation saying, hey, we know that things are moving kind of rapidly right now, but if you need us, here we are. Here's a donation towards the arrangements. Let us know, and we'll also reach back out to you after you went through, your funeral repast phase. And most people saying, yeah, because that's when I feel like I'm gonna need the most support. Because, the one thing I can honestly admit is when you're going through this process, you're kind of and I'm talking fast because my anxiety is building, FYI. But when you're going through this phase, you're already thinking ahead. So you've thought about the funeral, you've thought about the repast, you're thinking about what life is going to look like in these next moments. So, knowing that you absolutely may need the support because everything is going to die down. How do you now support yourself? How do you help your spouse? How do you help your other children? How do you help your mom, your siblings? So that's a way that I think medical professionals can really step in, acknowledging they don't know what you need. Let me know how I can help. Offering, if you need, support around the planning of the funeral, let me know what I can do, and that's generally a start because you want to take it step by step because the funeral is the next step in this family's phase that they have to plan. Things that in my experience, and I can speak for me, there wasn't a lot of support at all. We left the hospital with no pamphlets, no anything about what to do next. To the point I thought I needed to go to the medical examiner's office. So yeah, I think that it is important for medical professionals. And I'll also say from a different standpoint, even about that, being again in a space that we operate in a both and perspective. Medical examiners, medical doctors and things like that, because of the fast pace of where society tells them that they have to be, it's almost like they have to become numb to even dealing with families and loss. So of course we don't expect them to know how to respond when they're told you need to see this many people in this many hours, and you have this quota to meet, and you need to make sure that this many people get their well child visits. All of the responsibilities that are placed upon them, that they end up losing the humanity in themselves. That's
Yeah. Yes to all of that. And I mean, I'll start with the one thing that I think could be improved, because I think it's easier to start there and then kind of focus more on the things that are going well. But we had so many services that were involved in Jack's life. So pharmacy and medical equipment and, other medical supplies, for example. So getting those phone calls for what's your order and are you ready for your next shipment and all that stuff after he passed away, that was really painful. And it feels like it could be an easy fix. Like, have somebody else take care of that. Have one of his doctors, one of the 25 doctors could have possibly taken care of that for us, just to take one thing off of our plate. And it's just really awkward to have those phone calls. So it seems like a little thing, but it was a big deal for me. But in the hospital when he passed, I mean, we went to the emergency room thinking we were just dealing with another kind of typical crisis, and eventually realized that, he was going to die. So I really appreciate the child life services coming in and going through all the different options that we had. We did footprints and handprints and had molds made of his hands and did some bigger print art, which at the time it was like, you've got to be kidding me. My kid is dying. I don't want to be doing art. But I'm really, really happy that we have that stuff. And they packaged it up really nicely and sent us a nice box and a letter. It just so happened that a nurse who we had worked with from the time Jack was born at St. Mary's Hospital was the one who was with us when he died. So it was really touching. And just having her there, it was just such a weird coincidence, but it was really comforting. She's written us a letter every year since, and those are things that I think the system are doing well. And Jack is also an organ donor, so it does make me happy that we're able to honor other people's lives in that way. But I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit to kind of what I've learned about grief. And that is, it's okay to not be okay. We all, I think that we have to be okay. Like, you're trying to fix the problem. Grief is not a problem that's going to be fixed. Grief is always going to be in me. It's not that the grief gets smaller, but I keep growing around it.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
I had never thought about it that way, Danielle. That's an amazing way to look at it, and in some ways, it's more comforting than the grief will lessen. It's a lot more comforting to think that I'm going to grow around it.
Yeah.
Life and its perspective changes when it's like you evolve to wanting to understand and have a more in-depth understanding of what grief and loss is, even to know that that simple relationship that you're no longer in is a form of grief and loss, and it deserves for you to go through that process of dealing with it. And especially with the loss of a child, and again, where I am, and I'm sure Danielle, it's not something we live with an expectation that our children will bury us, not that we will bury one of our children. So that's the last thing. Even though it may have been mentioned or told at some point, but that's the last thing that any person during their pregnancy is thinking about, that they would have, and 4 months after their child is born, or 5 or 6 years after their child is born, that they will actually have to bury their child. So when you're a parent, you have an expectation that your children will bury you. But going through the journey, we know that that's not always the case. And for every year you move forward in being a parent, you think about the milestones, but you're able to find a place to honor them and those memories and and appreciate the times that you did get. And that's just a part of evolving and becoming a better person, a better you, um, for yourself and for everyone around you. You have a lot more compassion.
100%. I think that's one of the words that I've kind of latched onto is perspective. The shift in perspective and attitude from just becoming a parent, but then for me, it was getting a diagnosis for Jack, and then other diagnoses that followed that. There were little periods where I was grieving things about his life from the time he was born up until he died, which then grieving the loss of his life, and then grieving the life that I thought I was going to have even before, during, and after him. Yeah, it's Jack being in my life made me a different person, and then Jack leaving, physically leaving, made me a different person too. Just my perspective has changed dramatically, just about everything, and being able to give people more grace, like you mentioned, is just, I think, one of the best lessons that he taught me. And it sucks that I had to lose my kid to learn that, but it's life.
And I'll say to that, oftentimes in this space, when people go through loss, you eventually get to a point where you know that happiness and sadness can live in the same space. And yeah, they can both reside together. I can be both sad and happy, because those 4 months, those 4 short months that I got, in 4 months, this little baby who couldn't even talk to me where I could understand, he changed me. He changed me, and he changed me for the better. And like Danielle said, it sucks that losing him had to be the way. There's a book called The Purpose of a Driven Life that I read years and years ago. And I often wonder, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? When is it gonna come? And I can remember saying, damn it, why did this have to be the purpose? But as I meet more and more people, and I find my community of people who understand my experience, or when I say, I just wish I could be dead, that I'm not saying that I want to die or I'm going to commit suicide. I have an empty feeling. And for them to be able to honor that space with me. And even when I meet with clients, I don't call people my clients. I call them my peers, because we are peers. I never want to be considered an expert as it relates to this experience, because I'm also a part of the work. And if I can, as you all may have mentioned, I didn't say I'm certified in, or, I said my accomplishments, because they are just accomplishments, because just like I have a sense, or got a sense, to go out to talk about these things, that's also a part of my healing, because not only do I get to share Zaire, but I get to help other people who may not see themselves getting through this journey. And I can tell them, yeah, I was a functioning alcoholic. I went through that process. But when I connected, when people came through with me and said, okay, Felicia, that's enough, and then for me to get confirmation driving down the road to have that next drink, it was like, no, I heard a voice. I don't know if it was mine or what, or Zai's or God's or whatever, but it was no, this is enough. You said that you were going to make me proud. I didn't know what that looked like. That was me enrolling in school. That was me saying every day, I don't know what this looks like, but I got to get up. I got to get out of this house. I have to ground myself. I have to smell the fresh air. I have to, I have to, I have to. And not only did me doing that, I connected with other people, but I went through those messages on Facebook from people who reached out to me saying, hey, I had a miscarriage. I've never talked about it. To say, well, let's talk about it. To now I get to share all of these babies. And every time I have to add a new one on, yes, it's hard. But I like to think that because they are angels, and we know they are, that they are connecting, and through that connection that they have in heaven or in the stars or wherever they may be, that they're connecting us here earthside to do something different and to do something better. And like Danielle said, to have more compassion, not to make an excuse for why people do some of the things that they do, but to have compassion for the trauma that they may have experienced that has not allowed them to come out of this tormenting place that they may be in, that they haven't had the experience that we had, to move themselves to a space of healing. And unfortunately, it's a thing of knowing that we'll be here when they have that experience to support them.
I don't know if you guys feel up to, if anybody has any questions out there. But we do have the ability to put in a chat, or I can, there's some notes in the chat if you can read those. I'm not going to read them because, I'll just cry, which me crying is not a pretty sight at all. So just 1 second. Okay, there we go. Now I can see if anybody wants to, if you do want to unmute and you have a question for them, or put it in the chat. So what's in the chat is they are angels sending love to both of you strong mothers. And I very much agree with that as well. Thank you for that thought. Just give people a moment. Well, I am stuck in this weird position in that I know just little tiny bits more about each of your stories. And I have so many questions that we could be here for hours. So it's possible that, I'll just extend an invitation, bring you both back at some point, just to talk about my unanswered questions around having a child with special health care needs, about grief in the Black community and the uniqueness of that, because you both have this commonality that you shared with us, but I know you both have a uniqueness to your stories as well. And so we'll talk about that. But I just want to thank you both so much for being here, for sharing, for being vulnerable. I think we're better people because of it. So thank you so much for that. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now in case anybody wants to say anything off recording.